What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 10 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We'll do our best to answer them all, but with that being said, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdown, I want to highlight the sponsor of today's video, OddsJam. OddsJam continues to be the place that I use for all of my sports betting research, from the NFL, NBA, MLB, to daily fantasy and everything in between. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you firsthand all the amazing tools OddsJam has to offer. Starting with their positive EV tool, which identifies situations where a single sportsbook has mispriced their line compared to the rest of the market. They're basically willing to pay a lot more so that you bet with them compared to the other sportsbook. At the end of the day, you're getting the best odds, essentially a mathematical edge and guaranteed money in the long run. But also available is OddsJam's arbitrage tool, which shows situations where the market is so mispriced that you can bet on both sides and guarantee a risk-free return. OddsJam's calculators show you exactly how much you have to bet on the over and under and what the respective guaranteed risk-free return would be. There's also OddsJam's Sportsbook tool, which consolidates all available market info, over 200 sportsbooks, and provides updates in real time and allows you to see line movement. But my personal favorite is their Fantasy Optimizer tool, which is great for those using PrizePicks, Underdogs, or other daily fantasy sites, as you get to see discrepancies between all of these sportsbooks. Imagine, PrizePicks has a Patrick Mahomes line at 200.5 passing yards, and all other books like FanDuel and Underdog have this line at 230 passing yards. Well, getting the over 200.5 on PrizePicks would be an absolute steal. Guess what? OddsJam does that for you. And the good news is, if you sign up today and use our code PIGSKIN, check the link and promo code in the description of this video, you will get 25% off your first month. OddsJam also has a 7-day free trial, so you get to try before you buy. So don't waste any more time and sign up for OddsJam using our code PIGSKIN today. Now, we kick off Week 10 on Thursday with the Panthers at the Bears. And like I said about the running back matchup in this game, not a lot of marquee guys necessarily that you're going to be looking at here. When it comes to the wide receivers, the guy that I feel the most confident in is for sure Adam Thielen, because we at least know he's going to get his targets here, despite what the Panthers do offensively. We know Thielen is going to get close to double-digit targets, and going to get close to potentially double-digit catches, as he's pretty much done the majority of the season, which, in my opinion, is what makes him a PPR wide receiver one. Now, a lot of people are going to be talking DJ Moore, revenge game here versus the Panthers. Makes sense, but I do think he's going to be limited by his quarterback play in Bagent, because I could see the Bears trying to run it on the Panthers. I could see Bagent taking the ball, rushing it himself, and distributing it to other pass catchers like Mooney, who I have as a Sid, Kmet, for example, but Moore definitely is the guy with the highest upside out of all of them. He could outscore Thielen here, but I think you're going to be relying on big plays, touchdowns, things like that. If neither of these guys sees the touchdown success, I think Thielen is going to be the better play. Either way, though, I think, all things considered, Moore will be a high-end wide receiver too in this matchup. Now, we move on to the Colts at the Patriots. I will start Michael Pittman here. You see the asterisk next to Josh Downs' name. Banged up last week, still hasn't really practiced. So if I had to guess, I'd say that he doesn't play in this game. And if that's the case, I wouldn't force any other Colts wide receiver into your starting lineup. They've kind of proven that after Downs and Pittman, there's a big drop-off. So only going with Downs if he is actually healthy and is expected to play. But either way, his upside is going to be capped probably to a low-end wide receiver too. For the Patriots, you could argue you shouldn't start any of the Patriot wide receivers, and I wouldn't fault you. I'm giving Demario Douglas a chance, but it's only, and I truly mean all of these Patriot wide receivers, if you're desperate enough to start any of them, it's only in PPR formats, because you're hoping that they see 6, 7 targets. They see like 5, 6 catches for 50, 60 yards. the touchdown upside isn't there. So again, you're looking for like 10, 11 points is the realistic outcome here, which is, a wide receiver 3. I'm not trusting Juju Smith-Schuster. He hasn't really done anything all season long. Saw a couple of targets last week, more than really any point this season. I'll give Douglas the nod, but again, if you're in a standard format, I wouldn't force it. I think you're going to see the tight ends. I think you're going to see Ramondre and the rushing attack kind of try and take over here. So I don't love it from the New England Patriot wide receiver standpoint. I'm just going based off of a volume play. Then we go to the Browns at the Ravens. For the Browns, I'm only going with Amari Cooper. The Ravens have had a very, very good defense all season long, but I still think that Amari Cooper is the best wide receiver the Browns have. And with Deshaun Watson, maybe not playing up to previous Deshaun Watson standards, it's tough for this Browns offense to sustain multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. So I'm only going with Amari Cooper. I have him as a high-end wide receiver 2 for the Ravens. Zay Flowers, I think, will have a bounce back game. Look, last week was an odd game for the Ravens. They blew out the Seahawks, and they didn't need to do pretty much anything through the air. They didn't need to continue going on with their top guys late in that game. So I'm not really taking too much out of OBJ's performance, Odell's performance in that game. Again, you extrapolate what he's done all season long in games where it's not complete blowouts. Odell isn't the top guy for the Ravens. It's Zay Flowers, but I have him as a low-end wide receiver too, honestly, because I could still see the Ravens prioritizing the run, Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson on the ground. So that's why I have my expectations tempered here. Then I'm sitting Elijah Moore and Odell. I think they're just, again, big drop-offs after the top 2 guys here for Cleveland and Baltimore, respectively. Moving on, Packers at the Steelers. Only one guy I want to start here. That is Deontay Johnson. He's been a guy in PPR that has done very, very well since his return from injury. I think he can continue that on. I think he's a solid mid to high-end wide receiver too, depending on the game script. And then for the Packers, I'm sitting all Green Bay wide receivers. It's as simple as this. Unless the Packers have an insanely favorable matchup, Jordan Love can't be trusted, and the Packers wide receivers, neither of them are consistent enough. So to me, that just spells fantasy doom. I'm sitting all of them for the Steelers. George Pickens, he's kind of been unhappy with his role, I guess. I've said this before, the Steelers can't sustain multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. Deontay Johnson is the top guy right now, so George Pickens is a sit. Then we go to the 49ers at the Jaguars. For the 49ers, I'm continuing with this approach. Brandon Ayuk is the only 49er wide receiver that I'm trusting in this offense. You've got Christian McCaffrey. I mean, you have got George Kittle as well. So there's going to be a lot of passes going in other places. Deebo Samuel, he's been a more expensive version of Brandon Ayuk ever since you drafted him, and a more inconsistent version at that as well. Hasn't been getting his usage as a rusher. So to me, he is a sit for the Jaguars. Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley is going to have to be involved in this game. I think Kirk is the safer play. I think at the end of the day, they're probably both mid to high end wide receiver 2s. Afterwards, Saints at the Vikings. Look, I'm starting Chris Olave. He had a decent week. And then Michael Thomas, for the first time this entire season, had less than 6-7 targets, receptions. So it's a situation where Michael Thomas, what the 0 that he put up last week is, an anomaly if you look at the entirety of the season. Now, again, he's not Michael Thomas of old. We've said that since the start. That's why we've pretty much had him only in PPR as a guy that you should be starting, a low-end wide receiver 2 that's hopefully going to get you like between 10 and 14 points. That's the case again this week. Olave, the little bit higher upside. For the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, you notice the name back here on this list, but the asterisk. That's because he's been activated from his IR stint. Doesn't mean he's necessarily going to play. In fact, I would guess that he doesn't. And then Jordan Addison, if Justin Jefferson doesn't play, is a solid start, but he's not in the wide receiver one category. I could argue he's a low-end wide receiver two because of Josh Dobbs at quarterback. But there's a lot of other injuries to this team, like TJ Hawkinson banged up, KJ Osborne out. I still think Hawkinson plays, but to me, this is a very stingy Saints defense. So Addison, at this point in time, without Kirk Cousins, is really just a volume play, similar to what Marquise Brown was in Arizona with Dobbs. And then if Justin Jefferson returns, honestly, I probably wouldn't be starting Jordan Addison in those scenarios. Then Texans at the Bengals. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, I think are the top two options for the Texans. I know Noah Brown had a huge day last week, but I wouldn't necessarily go chasing those points. It hasn't been consistent for him, and I don't think we're going to get that type of scoring output from the Texans. Again, even though they will have to air it out here, that's why I feel comfortable in starting Tank and Nico Collins as, worst case, low to mid-level wide receiver twos. Nico Collins could be better than that. For the Bengals, you see a lot of asterisks here. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, both a little bit banged up, but I think at the end of the day, both ultimately end up playing. However, with both of them banged up, I think Tyler Boyd is a smart play this week, and I think he could see some decent opportunities. I'd be okay starting it if, assuming they all play, any one of this trio of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. In fact, I'd probably rank Tyler Boyd ahead of T. Higgins, and then Jamar Chase at the top of this list, again, assuming that they play. Then Titans at the Buccaneers. For the Titans, I'll start DeAndre Hopkins. Again, he is a volume-based play. Will Levis has been named the quarterback for the remainder of the season for the Titans. So Hopkins is at least going to get looks, but his dominant days are also gone. You're hoping for 10 to 15 points in PPR formats. For the Bucs, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. I think they've been the top two guys for this offense. Now, as of late, Cade Otton, Rashad White have kind of taken away some opportunities from them, but I still think that they're solid plays, mid-level wide receiver two plays for both of them. Afterwards, Lions at the Chargers. For the Lions, I can only trust Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs going to be involved as rushers. You've got Sam Laporta, who I'd argue is the number two pass catcher on this team, kind of like we predicted before the season started. And then Jameson Williams, the sophomore wide receiver. I think there's too much inconsistencies there. You've got Reynolds as well. There's a lot of other options. So I'm only going with the top guy, and I'm on Ross St. Brown. However, top 10 wide receiver for the Chargers. Same kind of situation. Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer on IR. If he wasn't, I'd be starting him. Quinn Johnston, I didn't love what I saw last week, but to be fair, that was a game where, Justin Herbert didn't have to do anything. So keep that in mind. This entire Chargers offense is going to be much more involved this week versus the Lions. But I think it's going to be Keenan Allen. I think it's going to be Austin Eckler. I think it's going to be Gerald Everett. I don't really trust any of the other wide receivers for the Chargers. Then Falcons at the Cardinals. I'll start Drake London, assuming that he plays. I said this before. I like the upside that Heineke gives this offense as far as pass catchers are concerned. High end wide receiver two, in my opinion, if he plays. For the Cardinals, thank you, everybody, for the patience. Kyler Murray, like we said, is back. We predicted that he'd be back at some point in the season. Now, it's kind of a little bit later than we might have anticipated, but if you hung on to Marquise Brown up until this point with Kyler Murray now returning, Marquise Brown is essentially, I think, a low-end wide receiver one for the remainder of the season like he was last year. So really high on Marquise Brown for the remainder of the season. I'm sitting all the other guys right now in Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson. I think Marquise Brown is the top guy, and that's my approach to this situation moving forward. Then Giants at the Cowboys. Only one wide receiver I want to go here with. It's CeeDee Lamb, the most consistent wide receiver that the Cowboys have had all season long. And honestly, what we saw with the Giants last week, how they got blown out versus the Raiders, I could see a very similar situation here versus the Cowboys. So I don't like Brendan Cooks or Michael Gallup or really any of the other wide receivers for the Cowboys because I think just game script could eliminate them from it, considering the Giants are down to their third string quarterback. Now for the Giants, with them being down to their third string quarterback, going up versus the Cowboys defense, I think it's going to be just a lot of Saquon Barkley. And then all these other New York wide receivers, it's nothing. I've said this before, they're just guys. They're nothing special. There's no alpha here. You sit all of them. Then Commanders at the Seahawks. I'll start Terry McLaurin. You might be surprised you don't have Jahan Dotson as a start. Look, I just don't believe in it. I don't think Jahan Dotson is all of a sudden now the guy for Washington. When Curtis Samuel returns, it's really going to just mess things up for Jahan Dotson's trajectory as of late. So I'm not a believer in Dotson. I think he's kind of a boomer bust guy, and there's no guarantee with the targets. Whereas Terry McLaurin, it's kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, behind wide receiver 2 for me. And the Commanders' defense, the secondary doesn't really scare me. I like DK Metcalf. I like Tyler Lockett. And similar with the Seahawks, they're not going to be in a situation where they're getting blown out like 30-0 like they were last week. So Jackson Smith and Jigba back to a sit. Garbage time allotted him some opportunities. That won't be the case here, in my opinion. So I'm going back to Lockett and Metcalf. Then Jets at the Raiders. I'm starting Garrett Wilson, but realize that Garrett Wilson, again, is one of those volume plays, similar to a Hopkins, similar to a Marquise Brown when Kyler Murray wasn't there, because Zach Wilson at quarterback is god-awful for the Jets, but we try and convince ourselves that when they face awful teams that he's okay. So with that in mind, Wilson is mainly a PPR play, mid-level wide receiver 2. For the Raiders, I'll start Devontae Adams. They've benched Jimmy Garoppolo, so I think that the pass catchers are going to be limited here. I have Devontae Adams as my top guy. I have Jacoby Myers as a sit for a couple of reasons. Not only Adams being the top guy, but also this could turn into a blowout again. I don't trust this Jets offense, and even with the Raiders defensively not being elite, I think they can cause a lot of issues for Zach Wilson, how a lot of people can cause issues for Zach Wilson. So game script wise, it could be just running the ball. It could be Devontae Adams, and then not a lot of the other pass catchers needing to be involved. Then Broncos at the Bills. I'm only confident in Stephon Diggs here. Gabe Davis is a sit to me. Dalton Kincaid has gotten a lot more involved here offensively at tight end for the Bills, making Gabe Davis a little bit more boom or bust than usual. So Diggs to me is a top 10 play at wide receiver. Gabe Davis is a sit for the Broncos. I'm sitting all the Denver wide receivers. They're too inconsistent. I know there's names, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, but it's tough to get excited about 4 or 5 catches for 40, 50 yards with touchdown instability. So for that reason, we're sitting all the Denver wide receivers. But with that, we wrap up our Week 10 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear in the comment section, do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We'll do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, we'll see you guys in future videos.